All right, welcome back to another episode of Paladin Financial Talk. I'm your host, Nikki Foley, and I'm with the wonderful Tony Shore today.
Yay, we're
Round of
here.
applause. There we go.
Woo!
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we are continuing our summertime lifestyle series here. And this month, we're talking about our complete guide to health and wellness, one of my favorite things.
Right. Health and wellness. I love it. This is good.
Exactly. So last week we had Mr. Jeff Quick from the Paladin team on, and he was covering kind of that intersection of health and financial, and went through a number of things with our listeners. And then the next 3 weeks is when we really dive into the health side of things, and we have guests lined up for every single week. Today we also have a dear, well, honestly, she's probably a dear friend, but she's my cousin. I mean, how fantastic.
It's all in the family. I love it. You have your cousin on as a guest today.
That's right.
That's a huge get.
That's exactly right. Well, several of my cousins they have like legitimate like jobs, like they're in the healthcare profession, they're attorneys, CPAs, things like that. And so I was talking to my sister a couple weeks ago, and she's also in the healthcare profession. And I said, Steph, would you like to be on the show with me? I'm going to cover some things. And she said, no way.
Oh no.
Yep. She doesn't like to be like center of attention, doesn't like to be on stage. And so I called Carrie and I said, Carrie, you will be perfect. And my sister was like, you know what? You should just go down the list of our cousins. You could have all kinds of great guests with the jobs they have. So how fun to have family with us and to be able to do this show.
That is awesome. I absolutely love that. I'm excited about it. And it sounds like a great plan. I mean, I'm not surprised, though, Nikki, that your family has a lot of really strong career people and intelligent people. You come from a great family.
Well, they got all the good stuff. I mean, they're the medical side of things here. And like I said, so let me tell you a little bit about Carrie and her background and why I think she's going to be perfect for the show today. And so, first of all, when Carrie walks in the room, she brightens the room. She has a smile like no other. And she has this natural curiosity about her, which I think makes her so good at what she does. And so what does she do? She is a physician assistant. She lives in Kansas City. And so she partners with a lot of the hospitals in the area. And then like we said here, she works with the doctors in the hospitals. And what she spends a lot of her time on is working with patients on what we're going to talk about today, and that's chronic diseases. And so I'd like to have Carrie tell us a little bit more about what she's doing and how she's spending her time and why she's such a good fit for the show today. So Carrie, I'm going to let you take over here and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm thrilled to be here. This is actually my first podcast, so this is a big deal. I have been a PA, that's short for physician assistant, for the past 5.5 years now. My first job right out of school was working in post-acute rehab, which is internal medicine. So that really encompasses all of the chronic aging diseases, hypertension, diabetes, getting into some of the more specialized things such as like post-stroke or Parkinson's disease, to even malnutrition, failure to thrive. I mean, anything you can imagine, we dealt with, and it was a lot of intensive work. I now work with orthopedic surgery, which that deals with plenty of chronic issues, including chronic pain, chronic back pain, chronic joint pain, and then, of course, the surgical side of things, from what the surgeries look like to correct those ailments.
Wow.
So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's impressive list.
That's really impressive. Number one, I know how hard it is to become a PA. My son is going through that right now.
Awesome.
He went to pre-PA for 4 years, and now he's in PA school, and he's actually gone through the first year, and he's working at a clinic and doing residencies.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how tough that is. The school was, his classes were tough.
Mm-hmm.
Be really smart to be a PA.
There we go, Carrie. That's why we picked you. Really smart. And what I love is what you have spent your time in for the last 5.5 years here is really what we're talking about today, is that chronic disease and the implications that go along with it. And when Carrie and I were chatting just briefly, so many of her stories tied right back to where I want the show to go today. And so as we talk, what I want our listeners to recognize is some of the challenges and opportunities, both that are going to face them as they continue to age, and how managing their health can really play or have an impact for the long term. And so, what Carrie is prepared to talk about today is some of the prevention that goes along with it, and then recognizing these symptoms and getting ahead of things versus letting them play out. But she has the horror stories that go along with, if
Oh,
you let them play out, what does that look like? And then what do your choices become when you do let those play out?
sure.
And
Yeah,
then all
both my parents have Parkinson's.
yeah.
So both my mom and dad.
Yeah.
S
Yeah. And so then at the end, I'll just wrap it up and kind of bridge that gap again between the health and the financial side of things. And so, again, couldn't be more excited to have Carrie with us, and her background is going to be fantastic for this.
I mean, I kind of piggybacking on that, Nikki. Everyone ages. That's inevitable. But how you age, that in the things that you do starting at any age, so I say youth, but really 30s, 40s, 50s, the daily things that a person does greatly impacts what that aging looks like. I have, patients who come in at 80, 90 years old who are still able to travel the world, still have their health, they're on minimal medications. And I have other people who come in, I mean, it's so sad, in their late 40s, 50s, who can hardly walk. They can't walk without, use of a cane or some sort of assist device. And so it is a lot, and it's very humbling to see the discrepancies in how people treat their bodies and what that looks like with aging, and tying it back into the cost. I mean, everything comes down to cost. And so I think it's such an important topic for people to be aware of, and really be able to take ownership with, and be able to say, I can age well, and I can keep my health, because what else do we have?
Carrie, you bring a good point, is we are talking to people of all ages. And I like to point that out when we have our conversations that, Carrie mentioned 30s, 40s, 50s. So here is when you can start controlling things. And so taking those preventative steps. And then if you are past that, again, you may be in a position to still be very preventative. But if not, how can we manage the issues that you have? And how do we make sure we make good financial decisions along the way to support those? And so, with that, how do we want to go about this, Carrie? Do you want to narrow this down to just a few of the chronic diseases and talk about prevention to start with?
Yeah, we can get started with that. Um, I feel like the um,
Do you
most kind of the most common diseases, certainly, that I see, um, cognitive issues are um, always at play. Um,
Absolutely. I think the cognitive side of things are probably the ones that we start to hear about initially. And I want to point out a couple things before you get going, Carrie, here. I apologize,
mhm,
just so I bring it
mhm,
back to the financial side of things. So,
mhm,
cognitive is one piece, and to manage that health side. But when the cognitive comes into it, you have to start getting into the financial and the legal side of things as
mhm.
people start to lose the mental capacity. Do they have to bring in a power of attorney, and making sure that side of things is prepared ahead of time? And so, again, when we start to talk about cognitive, I like to remind of the legal and the financial piece that goes along with it. So, Carrie, go ahead, though, as we talk about cognitive, remind our listeners what cognitive means, and then what are some of the diseases that fall into that, and some of the prevention.
Well, and certainly having power of attorney, that's very important, because what happens, I mean, so cognitive issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, um, just, I mean, general aging, forgetfulness does come along with that. And I think it's really important for patients as they age, I mean, really at any age, to have, a family member come with them to their doctor's appointments, to make sure that there's two set of ears understanding and hearing what the doctor's saying. But kind of going back to the power of attorney, just really, making sure that your wishes are set in stone, because when a patient has, dementia, they can take turns for the worse quickly. But kind of going back to more general, cognitive issues that we commonly see: dementia, Alzheimer's, aging, and that can really start out as early onset, and it can, progress all the way to the person doesn't know how to, or isn't reminded, basic functions such as eating, drinking, um, certainly how to get up. I mean, that function's lost. Very sad.
Are there any things that you recommend or have seen recommended just for preventative from that perspective? Very easy, common tips. And if you don't, that's fine. I know that you're working a little bit more now on the physical side of things, which we'll switch to here in a moment. But anything that you recommend preventative on the cognitive side?
I'll kind of break this down into 3 categories just to keep it. And a lot of these will be tie over to all other disease. Exercise is always great. Exercise, being low impact activity and strength training, that is going to just be wonderful for the whole body. Eating well, specifically for the brain, making sure you're getting enough omegas, which that can come in the form of salmon or a supplement. Blueberries. So just good nutrition. I mean, really, that those were kind of nitpicky suggestions, but really focusing on whole foods. So if an ingredient has the food has one ingredient, typically that's what you should be focusing on eating. If it has a whole list of ingredients, then that's more packaged and processed, and stay away from it. But really, as you
does
age,
pizza count as one ingredient? Carrie? Could we make that somehow? Can I say that pizza?
I think pizza comes up on every episode, Carrie, just so you know. Only on an episode we are going to talk about pizza.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about diet and exercise, and Carrie, the last time I exercised was during the Carter administration. Is that bad?
Oh, that's bad, and I
Carter
think
administration is.
Yeah, she's too young to even remember, or she wasn't alive then. But yes, no.
Well, actually. But what I would tell people about exercise is find something that you enjoy. Pickleball is having such a renaissance.
Yes.
And I mean, it's so social, and that, the sense of community and socialness, that's great for the aging diseases also. And it also, gets you a little bit active. But what I was going to say about the pizza, something that, the other little tidbit is activating the mind. And that can either be through, reading or trying something new. And trying something new can be trying different recipes. So we can incorporate pizza as one of our healthy lifestyle points if people are willing to, go through the task of, finding the recipe for the dough and actually making it. Just that creativity and kind of trying a new skill set, something that you're not used to. People always say, like, do a Sudoku, but not everyone likes to sit down and, do that type of activity. And anything to kind of be creative and get you out of your normal routine is really good for the aging brain.
That's fantastic.
I've heard playing an instrument too.
Playing an instrument, yes,
really good for cognitive abilities.
Yep, playing an instrument, learning a second language. There's so many awesome apps out there now for that. I mean, anything to get you out of your routine and stimulate your mind and creativity.
Sure.
Absolutely. So let's jump ahead here to the physical side of things.
Mhm.
So I started with cognitive. Physical is such a key piece. So let's talk about what might fall into the physical side of things and just give us a couple of the most common things that you're seeing and things that people might run into from a chronic disease and conditions.
Most common would definitely be arthritis, osteoarthritis. That's just general joint pain, typically associated with aging. There's a higher incidence of people who have heavier body weight. They will typically experience more pain because it's just more force on the joints. So really, with that, maintaining a healthy body weight, doing low impact exercise, that can be as simple as walking, going for hikes. It can also be as more intensive as going to the gym and doing various workout classes or getting on the elliptical. But just finding something that a person enjoys doing, and that is fun to do. That's so important. But joint pain, my gosh, there's so much joint pain out there, and it's a combination of physical changes in the joint space, but also just the associated inflammation that increases pain. And inflammation really comes from, unfortunately, a lot of our diet, and just the American diet and relying on processed foods.
I feel like this is one big circle that we're talking about here,
Yeah.
Carrie.
No.
It comes back to foods and processed
back.
foods. And it really does. And you do
does.
hear about countries where, they're really obesity is not very common. And they're eating fresh foods. They don't eat processed foods is a common denominator, I've heard.
Yeah.
And really a good practical tip for anybody at any age, just to, everyone can meal plan, right? And have an idea, but physically going to the grocery store, there's so many distractions in the American grocery store from just all the processed foods and all the snacks. And so, I mean, the access that we have to like Instacart and ordering and then going and picking up your groceries, that way you aren't as tempted. So you're literally only ordering what's on your list. And that's not only more cost effective, but kind of help that impulse shopping.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely is. Carrie, one of the things that we had just briefly chatted about before the show was what you see when you are working with individuals and how, I laughed about this being kind of one big circle. It comes back to food and some of your diet decisions. But when you are faced with situations, you then you get hit with having to make decisions or choosing between two options that you don't want to be
Mhm.
choosing between. And so
Yeah.
go through what you see on kind of a day-to-day basis and where people get if they don't make preventative steps along the way.
I mean, I think it's hard because with how busy our society is, it's easy to, not do the exercise or to reach for the unhealthier food. And in some cases, it's cheaper. However, if you make the investment early, it will pay off later on down the road. A lot. I mean, from my time in internal medicine, this is a typical patient that I would see. They had the normal, sad to say, but normal types of diseases: hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, um, arthritis, generally just kind of failure to thrive. They, can't physically get up as easily anymore. They need more help at home. They've landed in the hospital from, let's say, a UTI or some other type of infection. They aren't healthy enough to go home. They end up in post acute rehab. And then they're really kind of faced with this. Well, they can't go home without help, but financially, they don't have money to cover home health. They don't want to go into long term care or another type of assisted living facility because A, that's loss of independence, and B, the cost associated with that. And I see families commonly take on the role of being caregiver. And, with that comes a whole host of really just guilt from the patient standpoint. And so that patient population that I saw frequently at my old job, that it was really hard in terms of the family dynamics and the financial piece to it. But what I see commonly now working in orthopedic surgery is, patients who have this chronic joint pain, they need joint replacement. I mean, really, a lot of their pain could probably be subsided with, healthy weight management, exercise, and appropriate food intake. But a lot of people, that seems overwhelming, and in our healthcare system, we don't have time to counsel every patient. And so, talking about surgery, they come to see us, they want to talk about surgery, and then they kind of are hit with the realistic, I guess, you know, after what does after surgery look like, needing to take off six weeks to 12 weeks of work depending on the nature of what they do. And there's cost associated with that too. And so really cost is such a big part of it, plays such a part in what is recommended even from a medical standpoint.
Carrie, I don't think that you meant to do this, but you just teed up Paladin Financial really well right here as
Yeah,
you talk about
perfect.
what you're sharing in the day to day. And so I'm going to take a moment and bring it back to the financial conversations that we have in our
Yeah.
office. And so as we're handling more of the Medicare side of things, some of the health side becomes more prominent in financial conversations. And as you're making decisions about your health care, you're faced with how much do you want to pay upfront versus how much you want to pay as you go along. And oftentimes people are like, well, I'll pay as I go. I'd rather take that risk. I don't want to shell out money, honestly, for a health insurance plan that I might not use. I mean, that's a very common um, obstacle as you talk about insurance in general. I don't want to pay for something I don't know that I might not use. So, conversation though being had here is very quickly with the diet and the choices you make, you get yourself into a situation where you're faced with making decisions because of a financial what you can do financially. So Carrie used the example of somebody needs to be off 6 to 12 weeks. They can't be working. Are they prepared for a situation like that? And that's something that we want to make sure you are prepared, that if you need to take care of yourself and be off work, no problem. That's part of our plan. It's also the situation, as Carrie talked about, where you don't have to go home and try to figure out how a family member can take care of you. Instead, your health plan and the decisions that you made have you set up for, you can go into a rehab facility, you can get the care you need, you can have meals paid for by, honestly, it comes from the health companies as part of a Medicare or Medicare Advantage. And so talking about the reality of, it may not be a long-term care situation, but it's that intermediate situation when something happens to you and then you have to make decisions based off of money. Well, let's get you set up for that upfront versus reactively. So, Carrie,
Gosh, Nikki, from seeing it firsthand, if I could stress to people to have their finances in that regard in order, it's so important. I mean, people don't even realize too, if they go home, let's say they don't need 24-hour care. Let's say a family member doesn't have to be with them all the time, but there's typically a lot of doctor's appointments. We have patients all the time with the issue of, oh, well, I just had surgery on my foot. I can't drive. How do I get to that appointment? Oh, am I supposed to set up Uber? Am I supposed to do a ride service through X, Y, and Z? Who do I have to help me set that up? I mean, there's so many obstacles for people if they do not have these things come up, and people don't even realize until they go through it, and it's so overwhelming. And so just set it up. Everyone runs into issues that even if you're a healthy person, you can still, I mean, osteoporosis, that's associated with aging. You could fall, you could break your hip, you could need X, Y, and Z, even if you are a healthy individual. So I feel very passionate about that after having seen it firsthand and the issues that it caused for people.
Yeah, preventive care is the key from what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and you find that our insurance companies stress that so much, but until you have lived it, like Carrie
Yeah.
is describing it, it's not tangible and you can't feel it. And you don't know how you don't know how it's going to impact you. So, Carrie, I'm going to tell you a little quick story here, and then I'll keep you going on your portion of it. We had a client that was in a situation where they were at the grocery store. They had a stroke while they were talking to the shopper next to them, and they were not initially able to communicate to the point where, there's a clear gap, a medical emergency starting to happen, and then she was able to get out that she was having a stroke. They called 911, and everything fell into place, and she is doing great. However, let's talk about that situation as you're surrounded with your friends and your family that are aging. What are some things that they should be on the lookout for that are medically related, that maybe fall into these categories of very common chronic conditions that people should be on the lookout for?
Oh gosh, that is honestly that's really scary for that individual. I'm glad that she was able to get the help she needs and that she's okay. I mean, generally, if an older individual is not acting like themselves, like kind of cognitively not able to recall things that they were able to recall just a couple of days ago, that's a sign of a number of things. Speaking specifically of signs of, stroke, just always look for asymmetry in the body from one side to the other, whether that's abnormal arm or leg movement or abnormal, facial expressions. Generally, just feel an individual, especially at a certain age, being, overly tired, overly exhausted. Those are kind of signs that something is likely going wrong. Or going on that, needs to be further looked at, especially as there's more chronic disease associated. Those things need to be looked at more closely.
Absolutely. So being tired, things that are cognitive in nature, just be proactive is basically what I heard you say,
Mhm.
Carrie. Is it's not
Mhm.
going to hurt you to go get it checked out and be honestly an advocate for yourself in the healthcare system.
Yes, and I mean, abnormal pain, chest pain, down the arm. But yes, be proactive. Be in tune with your body and what and family members too. I hope everyone uh, having a sense of community. I guess that you do have people who will look at you, because sometimes it's hard for the patient to be like, maybe I do need help. Hopefully, having a family member to be like, hey, you're not acting like yourself. Let's get that checked out.
As you say some of that, Carrie, it makes me think about, when you say community and then you're not acting like yourself, the concerns that go along with anxiety and depression. And that's something that I think it's very prevalent in older, now I think just after COVID, I mean, you see those
Everyone.
statistics,
Yeah.
have grown significantly, but as an aging population, that's I think the numbers have specifically grown, and we have a whole episode dedicated to this at the end of the month, which I'm very excited about because I think it's impacting people, and it's not one that people like to talk about a lot. And
I'm anxious about it. About that episode.
Tony, sure. Carrie, what else should we know about that you want to share, either a story or things to look for, whether cognitive, physical, symptoms, anything that we've talked about that you want to just really bring home a certain point or share with our listeners?
I mean, just getting me started talking. I think that looking at a person's lifespan, a person is going to have to make the investment in their health, whether they do it preemptively with, exercise, good diet, or they do it later on, when they are in their 70s, 80s, and they can't care for themselves. Like at some point, their health is going to be their main focus. And so I think doing it in a way that a person can control, which is doing it when you making these health choices when you are healthy and you can still control your outcome in your life, is just the most important way to do it. And I think that in today's society, it's so overwhelming. Do you eat plant-based? Do you get 120 grams of protein a day, or is that too much? Do you focus on fiber, fats? Do you focus on cardio? I mean, there's so many different nuances to it. And I do think that now people are realizing that, and the industry of like health coaching is becoming more important. And so I think just reach out for help. That's what I'm trying to say, is if you feel overwhelmed, reach out for help, because paying for things up front now, to get your mindset and health in control and have an accountability partner to do that is going to be important, because if you don't do it now, chances are you will have to do it later on in your life anyway, and it won't be as fun then. And by fun I mean it'll be at the jurisdiction of somebody else, not your
Yeah.
own.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carrie. And I think it's been a great episode, Nikki. Nikki, do you have any last thoughts on the financial aspect of all this before we go?
Absolutely. Just a couple points, as Carrie has made some really good ones, and she has naturally weaved together the financial and the health part of it. And so I don't want to spend too much time recapping because she's done such a nice job with that. But I think the last thing that I heard her say, and I just want to point out, is in most cases, people want control. And
Yeah.
by taking action early and planning, both on the health and the financial side of things, you keep control for a longer period of time. And I think that's the message, is figuring out what that means to you and applying it back. And hopefully some of the stories that Carrie shared today can resonate, and hopefully maybe even help you take some action that maybe you weren't ready to do previously. So certainly great information for us, Carrie. We're so grateful to have you, and just planning for future care and remaining in control is the key pieces here. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to wrap us up. I do have a couple announcements that I want to make, Tony, if that's
Yes.
okay. We are going to
Excellent.
continue on this conversation for the next 2 weeks. We have guests next week and the following week. As I already foreshadowed, we have anxiety and depression our last week. And next week, we're on perimenopause and menopause. So my goodness, I can't wait to see how many people we have filling in, knocking on the door to get into next week's show. But
Right.
I think it's going to be a good one. And then to wrap all of this up, on September 9th, we have our client appreciation event that is face-to-face at our Forgotten Star Brewery. And so looking forward to that in Fridley. And so we'll want to make sure all of our listeners are joining us there. And if you have a desire to come, just make sure you get in touch with our office. We do have an outside speaker, Dave Harris from the Nationwide Retirement Institute, who will be joining us. And we're talking all about risk of aging. So continuing the conversation. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up here. So if you would like to talk to us in more detail about some of the things that are financially related to today's conversation, call us at 651-842-8406. You can always visit our website at paladinfinancial.com. And then, of course, keep watching us on YouTube. Continue to follow us on the social media side of things. And again, Carrie, thank you so much for being with us today and the information you shared.
Thanks for having me, you guys. Bye.
Yeah, what a great wealth of information, Carrie and Nikki. Great show today. Listeners, viewers, that does it for today's episode of Paladin Financial Talk with our host, Nikki Foley.